Our lives are built on the stories we tell. At both an individual and communal level, they orient and mould us, shaping our perspectives and outlining our reality. In an age where life can seem increasingly fettered by rules and regulations, where communication is drowned by endless jargon and noise demanding our attention, where the past is heaved overboard in order that we might more quickly race blindly towards the future, where places become zones, where endless change is automatically equated with progress, and where the sacred is replaced by the material, the stories we tell ourselves in modernity seem increasingly to offer little by way of consolation, enchantment, wonder or joy. So, with this in mind, and in search of alternate perspectives and old stories to be heard anew, I'm setting off from the archives of the National Folklore Collection, driving through the rolling plains of the Midlands to the village of Crusheen, County Clare, near Ireland's western coast, where I've arranged to meet a man who has been described as a national treasure, a master storyteller and an inspired performer. Eddie Lenihan is an author and storyteller who has been collecting traditional stories and customs from an older generation for over 40 years. His 2003 book, Meeting the Other Crowd, has been translated into many languages and is dedicated by Eddie to all those tellers now gone, whose voices are not forgotten, and to those still with us, whose knowledge is more indispensable than ever. As usual, throughout this episode you'll hear a mixture of conversation along with original archival field recordings from the National Folklore Collection concerning the topics under discussion. For more information regarding these excerpts, you can visit our SoundCloud page for details. So, welcome to Blúiríní Béaloidis number 22, and stay with us as we survey the landscapes and panoramas presented by the old stories and customs of our forebears, as we traverse and explore invisible worlds. When did you grow interested in the oral tradition, specifically the idea that not just
when I was
books?
sent out, you see, during the MA for phonetics, when I was sent out to actually listen to old people's accents and found out that the accents were wonderful, but it was the stories they were telling me in those accents were a lot more interesting, and I've kept collecting ever since.
So you've been collecting since the 70s now, is it?
Oh, since I remember. I still have the first tape I ever made, October 1975.
No way.
In Brosna, from an old man who remembered the Boer War.
My God.
And so I'll go back as far as the Boer War. Personally.
Yeah.
Personally.
That's incredible.
He remembered the Boer War.
Yeah.
Personally. Just like he remembered the huge snowstorm of 1889, I think, when the snow was nearly 6 feet high and people had to dig themselves out to go to get food. He said it was terrible. It was terrible.
And then within that you began to take an interest in ideas about the other world or the fairies, which often people have this kind of I suppose I get quite frustrated, a kind of literary Tinkerbell kind of idea of these little winged little Peter Pan genteel ladies floating around, which isn't how the fairies exist in tradition at all, but you took quite an interest in that sort of material, and you collected an enormous amount from people about their this belief in the otherworld community that live alongside us in the natural landscape.
Absolutely right, and that was what this first Meeting the Other Crowd book was about, and I'll certainly have a second volume of that, because I've been very surprised that out of the various 20 books I've done, that would have been the most popular of all of them, because in fairness now to that Caroline Green, she was the one who asked me would I be prepared to put those stories together, because they might still have been lying on my shelves if she hadn't asked me. So I did, and she helped, and that was published first in America by Penguin in America, and it has come out since in Japanese. Have you ever seen the Japanese edition? Beautiful edition. Beautiful edition they did. The Italian one I wasn't pleased with, simply because their cover was the little Tinkerbell fairies. How ridiculous. But the Japanese did a lovely job. And Biddy Early will be out in Japanese next year.
No way.
And Defiant Irish Women came out in Japanese only about 3 weeks ago.
And maybe to explain, even for people who listen who mightn't be familiar, Biddy Early was a kind of a wise woman, a Banfassa from this side of the country. What was her deal?
Well, she was alive from 1798 to 1874, and there's no doubt about thousands came to her. Without a doubt, she cured. She was a herbalist, she was a clairvoyant, she was a healer, Banshee, and of all the healing women of the 19th century, all over Ireland, she was by far and far away the most famous. People came from all parts of Ireland to Biddy. She lived in Fecal, about 12 miles from here, there in East Clare. And you can still see the ruins of her. Now, it was a reconstructed cottage in the 1970s. Dr. Bill Lenihan reconstructed her cottage, but now it has gone into ruins again. People always said that you should never profit by her name, and anybody who ever did had no look for it. Now, I don't know, because I always fail to see that a woman who did such great good in her lifetime, how could you have misfortune from a woman like that? And I never heard anybody speaking bad about Biddy. The only people who came to any kind of, we'll say, bad, inverted commas, were people who went to mock her. If you went to mock Biddy, she'd very quickly put you in your place. She would know if you were talking about her on your way even there. She seemed to have a knack of knowing when you arrived what you had been saying about her. And what frightened people when you arrived at her house was that she'd know you by name, where you came from. Now, cynics all will say that she had somebody waiting, who would tell her that question. One of her husbands, she was married 4 times, a husband or somebody else would be there to question people in the queue. There was always a huge queue at her door, travel down the line. What has you here? And I don't believe it somehow. It doesn't stand to reason, even though that could be true, but I don't know, knowing the kind of woman that she was. And I've heard stories, because look, the book I did about her now, I've heard so many stories. Not all, because I'm still discovering new ones, and the new edition of the book came out only recently. I found her death cert. Finally discovered her death cert, and I found it inside in the courthouse in Ennis when I was looking for something else, pure accident. And I found the death cert of one of her husbands, Tom Flannery. She was married 4 times. But that, I hope, has put an end to all this whole nonsense. So she was only a legendary character, and this notion that she put a curse on the Clare team, who didn't win in All Ireland in from 1914 to 1995. But how could she have put a curse on the Clare team, which she died in 1874, and the GAA wasn't even founded until 1884.
She was forward thinking, she was fairly ahead of her time.
She could foretell the future. But people, stories grow legs, as they say. But there's no doubt that she did cure. And a lot of the people, I've no doubt, who went to her, a lot of the illnesses were psychosomatic, or they were in the head or what. But look, people, if they want to be their minds put at ease, she could do it. And I suppose a lot of it was, calm talking, calm. She was a psychiatrist and a psychologist, I suppose, as well as everything else. Yeah. And what you'd pay a lot of money for today, wellness, call it what you like. Yeah. Biddy could do that. She was a woman ahead of her time. Simple as that.
No, you were going to give me one about Biddy Early, Francie.
There was this man, he came from the same quarter as myself. He was a farmer. He had a place of around 5 cows, and he was keep a very good horse. He was married, and he had 5 or 6 in family. And this harvest, it happened to come very bad. And he had hay bought. He had an acre or a couple of acres of hay bought, about a mile or 2 away from his own house. And himself and the wife went out saving this day, like, and in that time they racked the hay in patches. For as you know yourself, there was no machinery. But this day anyway, it was after a share of bad weather, and they were out, himself and the wife and some of the family, and there had a terrible fairy wind come, the shigui or whatever you call it. And of course, in the olden times when the Shigwe had come, a lot of people would throw themselves down if it came very bad. But this day it came very bad altogether. And even the patches of hay, they were all, thrown in together with the fairy wind. It came so bad. And his wife was lifting a fork of hay or something, and she got knocked. He took no notice of it. She got up again and saved away all day, and he took no notice of it. And they went home and everything was all right. But after a short while, she started to ail. Nothing wrong with her, no pain or anything. He tried doctors, he tried blessed wells, everything, no good. The devil doctor faster wouldn't cure her, no good. A year or two dragged away anyway, and she was still in bed, and go up and down, but no energy. Very little talk, and she was a very hearty kind of woman, a great singer and all that kind of a thing, but she stopped all that. For a finish, she got very bad entirely. And he said there was no alternative but to go to Biddy Early. He started away with his horse anyway, but the wife, the morning he was gone, they went to home or a home, whatever, she was very bad. He drove on in China anyway, and down Killamon and in Tinnis, out to Tuller, Fecal, wherever Biddy Early lived. He landed at Biddy's anyway, and the house was described to him, and he drove in the road to the house, or drove in near the house anyway. In fact, he knew she was up, the door was open, there was a half door in the house. He went in anyway, and he said, God bless, and she said, on your toe, and called him by his name. Well, I'm in the right house, says she, is this Biddy Early? You are, says she, in the right house, but you're Biddy late, says she. You neglected your wife, says she. You should have no woman at all. She dumbfounded the man. How do you make out that, says she? You got kind of crossed her. Nah, says she, sure, we have come here, says she, with the last couple of years, says she. Sure, that hadn't your own wife you're living with at all, says she, and that affair you're living with since the day the Shigwe, says she. You're living with a fairy, all that lit, says she. I got the man was down and out. But I have another news for you. Your wife is dead now, says she. I got the poor man started to cry anyway, but she made tea for him anyway. When he had the tea drank anyway, he said, but you have nothing to do for me. I have, says she, a thing to do for you. She went out anyway, and the thatch of the house along. People that time used to pick ash plants or any kind of sticks that we pick in the November darkness. They'd knocked in and they were limber and they'd never break. She went along the thatch anyway, and she drew an ash plant. No good, she stuck it back again. She drew another. She stuck it back again. She drew the third. This'll do you, says she. When you'll go home now, says she, there'll be a kind of a corpse house or a wake in progress, says she, in your house. But anyone that'll shake hands to you, but one thing, says she, you mustn't do, you mustn't come off of that horse and land at your own door, says she. First, says she, if you do, the game is up altogether. But one thing you must do, says she, when you go into the house now, they'll be talking to you and sympathising to you and all that, take no notice of them, says she. Take no notice in the world of them, says she, but close the back door, says she, and open the front door. He started away and lay into the corpse in the bed with that hash plant I gave us, says she, and bait bugger all out of her, says he. He went up on the horse anyway, and he was coming away. He dragged away anyway until he got home. And when he landed at home, there was a bit of confusion around the house anyway. And the wake, the corpse house, or the wake, or whatever you'd like to call it, was on. Of course, when he went in anyway, they were rushing out, sympathising with him. This poor old grabber woman rose out the corner anyway, and she went to shake hands to him, and he gave her a chuck, and he landed inside in the fire. Into the room anyway. Closed the back door anyway, and he opened the front door. Into the room, and he started baiting her with the ash plant for all he was worth. And the fairy went out the front door, out the back door, out the front door, and his wife came in the back door. That was all right. There was porter and baker's bread and a lot of things landed for the wake. And so they said it'd be better to bring it back again. No, says he. To unstir all this, says he, in place of a wake, says he, we'll have a big dance. It so happened anyway that Garrett Barry, the piper, was in a neighbouring house. And that's in for him. And in place of a wake, they had a dance. And that woman lived for years and years after.
Pishogues, people had a great belief in them, and believe you me, they're not gone away.
No, that you scratch the surface and you see these things are still there.
Still there.
These are kind of, again, for people who might be familiar with the term, are beliefs, I suppose, that ideal
That your
aspects
look
of magic
can be taken
or
away
exactly,
by magical means.
yeah.
They're still there. I get phone calls regularly from people worried out of their wits that they're being interfered with by people who have evil mind towards them.
Malintent.
Yeah, and I do the best I can. Again, I'm no psychiatrist, but you'd like to help people if you could.
Now, tell me about these shows that you squad. There was something about that, wasn't there?
Oh yes, there was. This place was full of those.
And was there some families then that were associated with it?
Oh yes, there was a lot of families who were known to be associated and used to practice those things.
You was running the family
I
then?
used to run in the family, and it has done. But
They never had good luck after it?
no, and I seen, to my own knowledge, a young married couple coming back from a honeymoon. I happened to be painting in their house. Him and his wife, I had their room and all papered and done for them when they were coming back. And so it was Sunday night. I was doing doors there, graining doors and all that. But I went up on a Monday morning. I had to get a drive up on a creamery car, and I'd get in there by McSlattery's and just cross over, only crossing the fence and in to their place and into their house. And this morning I went up. There was a full pig's head in the centre of their hall doorstep and 2 dead magpies. Oh, I didn't take too much notice of it, but there was a man, Bill Stubbins. He's still alive. He'll tell you if you ever meet him of that. Not too long ago I met him and hadn't seen him for quite a time, and we threw that very thing down. And there was another man there, James Mara. He was a curate in Drummond, and he went, I said, that's a funny thing out there. I can't understand what that is. So they came out anyway. They went in, and someone of them told Kennedy he wasn't up. So he got up. He got in his car and he drove back to Drummond and brought over the curate. The curate anyway put his stole on, and he got them, one of them in, to get a pitchfork, put the pig's head into the wheelbar and put the 2 dead magpies. And he took it to one of the remote parts of the farm, and he ordered them to be burned. At the meantime, he was walking with his stole on in front of that wheelbar, praying all the time. I seen that. That was one Pishog business I came in contact with. Oh, yes.
Just yesterday, there was a man here with me who is building a house, and he had a suspicion that maybe there was a fairy path in his way. And he had been phoning me, just as you were. and I said, look, the way the old people used to do this was by standing the corners. This time not with stones, but with the hazel sticks. And I said, look, I'm after trimming my hazel bushes, and I have hazel sticks here, and if you want to. And I told him how, and he came and he collected them yesterday. And if that puts the man, because the house he was building was very near a fort, and he took him away. If it puts his mind at ease, isn't that a good thing?
But what about the ferry pads now, ferry pad roads?
Well, there's supposed to be one up there,
Yeah.
whatever it is. It's right across the Coshels there. There's a path road, and it's up to this last, I didn't go up that mountain now this last 2 or 3 years, but there was a plain path right across there.
And they wouldn't be allowed to build on it or anything.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you now about the building part. I minded that myself, and anyone can see it yet. The foundation of a byre was cut in this particular place. It might be in 1920, around that date. And that night when this man was coming to build the byre, he used to say Minolan. That night, the whole country was out watching the lights up all around. And the old foundation that was there yet, they never closed it in, and they built the byre about 20 yards over from there. But it was alive with lights all around that foundation. There was lights all moving around and round for the foundation was cut.
It's an interesting aspect of the function of tradition when despite our apparent kind of progress in inverted commas and modernity that people have, that really you just need to scratch the surface and people's fears and fancies kind of come out in these ways. I remember reading about this idea of marking the boundaries of the site for a house, and in this instance it was stones. I think it was from reading Kevin Danaher, I think. And when they were knocked the next day, the idea being that there's a fairy path in this place that you shouldn't use it to build on. So you had to kind of navigate the natural environment or the space, not just along physical lines but metaphysical lines as well. And that's something that seems to be disappearing in many ways today, that we think of the natural landscape as just a kind of colossus or something like that, but there's no meaning behind it. But in a lot of these traditions you see the importance of these, the symbolic meaning maybe.
The problem nowadays is, you see, with all this machinery, farmers even have lost touch with their own land, because they get in a contractor to do a job, and it's just a job to be done. There was a time, and it isn't hugely long ago, when we'll say a big rock in the land would be left there, because first of all it was too troublesome to take out of it, and secondly it had been there, so leave it there was the notion. It wasn't doing any harm, but now it is, because there's these huge, massively expensive machines you've seen go on every road, the big green Class or David Brown or John Deere machines that cost $250,000, and if you injure one of those fucking machines by hitting a rock, you can't risk it. So they're getting a big bulldozer to take this rock out of it. And by the way, when you're at that, then you might as well do a job on something else and something else and something else. And you see, the farmer isn't doing it like he used to before, where he might hesitate, because that was there. My father told me, nowadays, contract job, do the whole thing, shift it, bye-bye. And there's no respect for anything. And might even include a fault. And when they shifted, oh, Jesus, I never knew. And, you know, what can be done when a thing is gone? Nothing. Doesn't matter. That was a national monument as well. Forget about fairy belief. But you're not allowed to shift these things. But when they're gone, that's it. There's no good finding a man €30,000 when it is gone. When it is gone, it is gone. And that's it.
The fairies, so you see, fairies interfere with no one, you don't interfere with their pat. Yeah. But if you interfere with their pat, it's all over with you. Oh no, Med Latin belonged to the fairy. I know now the man went into a fairy rat to cut down a tree, cut down sticks. The gentleman gave him the sticks, he was foolish. Yeah. And the man said, there's plenty of sticks there, he says, now around there, he says, around that place there. And says the man, he says, could we cut it down? He said, it would be dangerous to cut it down. And the old fellow said, the gentleman, of course, to get rid of them. Oh no, not at all, he says, you can cut it down. By Christ, he came home and he never got out of bed till he died. You know, we shouldn't meddle with them. They don't meddle with you and you shouldn't meddle with them.
I was chatting to, I was down in Port Dumla recently giving a talk there, but I was chatting to a farmer, a Limerick farmer, a young enough man, and he was describing, talking about place names. We just started talking about the disconnect between nature there, and I was mentioning how I noticed it even coming down here to kind of take, you know, exit 15 off the N18 onto R438 kind of thing, where numbers and letters zones replace places with names of townlands or families or names or place names and fields and so on. But this farmer is saying that even where he has his cattle, he uses some sort of software to mark the fields, and they're all just numbered. But what he's done is he's gone and he's identified the old, the family names, the local names of those fields, of the places that they retain. But like you say, when you have one man essentially in a factory roving up and down in one of these machines, the metal is gone. Oh. The communal aspect of these things disappeared, and the land, in that sense, I suppose, is not only disenchanted in the sense of belief, but there's an ignorance that descends, or a lack of care. There's not that sense of, my father said to keep this here, or don't cut down that tree, or don't go near that fort.
Well, just in this parish now, there are only 2 people left that I can visit at night, and that's it.
As a rambling house, you mean?
Yes. And they're both over, one of them is over 90, the other one, she's 95. And when they're gone, bye-bye. That's it. All over.
Well, this is, I think, what's so important, even the work, the field work that you've been doing, the thousands and thousands of hours of recordings that you've made over the years.
Without getting paid a penny.
Of course, but I wonder, on the other hand, despite all of these kind of, what I feel like things slipping away, or aspects of traditional life, or meaning in so many ways, or community falling away, there's a huge thirst and a hunger and appetite for this sort of material, like in meeting the other crowd. There's a kind of nourishment, I think, and people are hungry for this sort of for traditional knowledge, for a sense of themselves. You know,
I know it because I tell the stories, as I say to you. I know it because people out there will listen, and then they're surprised. But why weren't we told these? Especially in schools. But it shocks me in schools that how would I say, that the pupils know so little about them. The teachers know so little about them. The teachers, especially in primary schools, are not being taught anything about these in the colleges they're coming out of. They're being taught how to tick boxes. Tick boxes now is the modern kind of education. Very sad. Very sad. But I see it in schools constantly. The older teachers did know something about it.
And what do you think it is today, maybe? Are people not interested? Are they embarrassed by traditional stories?
They're not embarrassed, because there's nothing to be embarrassed about it. In this kind of knowledge.
Mm-hmm. No, the opposite. Yeah.
Yes, it's the opposite, because I can go abroad any time, and people abroad are fascinated by it. If we have so much of it in a small little island. The
thing that I liked as well, even your the opening dedication in that book, is to I can't quote it exactly now from memory, but to the tellers whose knowledge is more indispensable than ever now.
And it is.
It absolutely
is. It is, because we've been snowed under by bland shit that's available all over the world. You know, the Nike shoes and the Sony this and the big brands, and you get them anywhere, and it's the same brands in shop windows there as you get in High Street Dublin or Low Street London, or same shit.
I suppose this is then part of what you're saying at the start when we're sitting down before we were recording, is the life of our forebears when they're living in their own townlands and parishes often was contained within a relatively small physical area, but it was very deep, and that memory went very deep for us.
An individual to that particular place, and you will not get that particular thing, knowledge, brand as we'll call it, anywhere else.
Well, I suppose that is the local versus the global or the international.
It is. Yeah. Of course it is, and that's why every single one of those recordings I have there is individual. And when I come back from a place where I get a new fairy story, we'll say, something that I haven't heard before, I would give you that tape for €1,000.
Oh, you can, yeah.
That is something that's like gold.
Yeah.
That's like gold.
Absolutely, yeah.
I was recently down in West Limerick. I met an old man, and he told me a story about a fort, and it was during the Troubles. A bad time for fairies and everything else, you might say, and for going out and for people visiting, because it was too dangerous and everybody was on edge. But there was a cow calving, and again, there were, it was kind of a time that you should go out that time and you might meet more than the cow calving, but the cow was missing, and they were afraid to go looking for the cow because of the times they were in it. But they left it, hoping that she'd be all right, and there was a fort on their land. And in the morning they heard the cow noising and went out, and thank God there was the cow in the fort, and she had calved. But it wasn't just that. There was the calf tethered to one of the whitethorn bushes by the most delicate little rope of grass. Beautiful little delicate rope of grass. And who had done it? Must have been the lads.
Did you ever hear of cows being taken by the fairies once? I did.
I thought they were taken away.
Whatever.
I heard that the sergeant, and his name was Sergeant Black, he was in Rossport one time, and he had a cow, good cow she was, a red-horny cow. And she was a great cow show, a great show and all, but he didn't give in. He was a Protestant. He hadn't to tape on her. But she died. I suppose she died from milk fever or something. But it was supposed that they heard the cow, was a man going the road late at night, heard the cow, leaving the stable and going over the hill, lunging. So the cow died and was buried. And it was supposed that that cow was taken away by the fairies.
It's funny, I was gave a talk in Poland there recently, and at the end of the talk, a young woman there were people asking questions. A young woman asked, do people in Ireland still believe in the fairies? And there were Irish people and Polish people in the audience, and there was a certain kind of giggle maybe from some of the Irish people there. But I was saying that if you were to ask, I think a lot of Irish people about a kind of a belief in the otherworld, the supernatural, or the fairy house at large, that they might kind of laugh in your face at first, but if you ask them to go and cut down a whitethorn tree in the back garden, their face would go a little paler, you know what I mean? And these things are kind of always going, never gone, and actually that if you scratch the surface, a lot of them are still there.
Yeah. That's true. That is true. Yes, indeed. I was asking a priest, Johnny, recently, and priests are very difficult to interview, because I think that education has educated out of them. They're cautious, most of them. But I was asking that priest about the Banshee and putting him the questions that Sean O'Sullivan would have asked in the Handbook of Irish Folklore. Because I wanted to just see what the priest might believe, because the Banshee is so near the otherworldly, whether the otherworldly be heaven or whatever other world. And he began very cautiously by quoting me the Bible and Jesus and Jesus' miracles. But by the end of the conversation we had, he was quite a different person, because he quoted me a few stories that his own father had told him about experiences his father had had coming home on horseback and meeting something that frightened the horse, and a story or two stories about hearing the Banshee. Now, he wasn't saying that the Banshee either existed or didn't exist, but at least he had lightened off a bit on the academic. He was quite academic when he started, but he had softened out a bit to telling stories, at least telling stories, even though the stories might have been at second hand.
One night, something woke me, and I heard my mother. I thought I heard my mother calling me, and I got up, got into my slippers and went into her bedroom, and I found her very upset, distraught, very much so. And I wondered why she called me. I thought she never would do that unless she was very ill. So she said, did you hear the Banshee? And I said, something woke me, I don't know what it was. Well, she said, it was the Banshee. I've heard twice. And she said, I'm weak in the bed, I can scarcely talk to you. And she looked very, very disturbed. So I stayed with her, and some 5 minutes afterwards, I heard the same, and she just gripped my hand as I was sitting at the side of the bed. I heard the same awful, unearthly wailing. It was an unearthly, sad wailing sound, ending in a kind of a moan. A moaning, wailing sound, but terrifying, absolutely terrifying. That's the only way I can tell you. It didn't seem to me like a cat or anything human. And she, of course, was, again, became terribly disturbed. And but then she was frightened for me. So she said, don't take too much notice, she says, just a poor soul going to heaven. But she said, Johnny Condon has been working on a coffin tonight. So that there's somebody dying or dead, that's the reason for this. And then 10 minutes afterwards, I heard my father's key in the door, and he came up the stairs, and he saw both of us, and he knew, of course, what had happened. And my mother said, "I'm not able to talk to you. Did you hear her?" And my father said, "Yes, I did," he said. "In fact," he said, "it was the worst experience of her I have ever heard, because the cap was lifted right off my head at Johnny Condon's gate." But he said, "Oh no, they said a prayer." And so did I. We went back to bed. Now, my mother, that wasn't the first time that my mother, by the way, the person had died, and the name was O'Brien. Apparently it is where there's a no in the family, I think, or Mac, or so, old families, old Irish families. And my father was a farmer, became a farming stock in Cork, West Cork. So that he had, I suppose, the feeling about it. He had no doubt anyhow at all. And I didn't have any doubt. I didn't hear it, I think, after that ever. I didn't. But my mother had heard it before, and they heard it afterwards. So that it makes one think that it isn't all fable.
So they're not easy people to talk to, priests. And I recently found that in a case of what seemed to me to be an exorcism, a house where there was trouble, something was going on, definitely, and a family in the house, they were having some kind of bother with something in the house that wasn't right. And I asked people in the neighbourhood, what might it be? And they said, one old woman particularly said that she remembered in her young days that something was there too for a previous family that owned the house. And it seemed to be long-standing. And the priest was brought relatively recently for the present family in the house, and he came, and he was the exorcist for the diocese, and he did come. Oh Christ, he got an awful doing. He got an awful doing in the house. Whatever he disturbed him. Now, I went here, the same priest, is still alive. I was sent to him to find out, from himself, would he maybe talk to me, and would he be prepared to tell me maybe what he experienced. But God damn it, I've tried his house 3 or 4 times, and I cannot get him at home. And I would love to know, could he confirm for me, was that true or not? Because I'd like to hear that right out to the end, because second hand can be second hand. But the people who told me about him said no. And the odd behaviour in that house goes back to a previous, which is the house that isn't the right house. So there are places like that. There are houses like that they're not right places, we'll say. And it could be because they're built on a path. It could be because something bad was done there. It could be. But I'd like to find out, as much as I could. I do like to follow things out to an end, if an end is there.
What about ghosts up in Coexistence?
Ghosts. Well, wait a moment. I tell you about ghosts. There was another thing. After the big win, 1839, January 1839. My grandfather's house was blown down, and they decided they all looked for the most sheltered place that they could get there, and they decided that if ever there was another big wind, the houses wouldn't be blown down. And he went down onto what we call the High Rock. It was a very much sheltered place, and he started to build there. And he had the building up about 4 or 5 feet, and got up one morning and the whole thing knocked down. Started and rebuilt, and decided to watch it night after night, and they waited. It was up 5 feet again, And this night they heard the wild, weird music, and down comes somebody appeared to be throwing the stones down, and they were thrown down, and in spite of the fact that they approached the place with sticks and everything, but down came the walls, they could see nobody. And they shifted that and built it to the present days.
When they'd be selecting a site now to build a house, do you know
after the big wind, yes, after the big wind, the most sheltered and the most low-lying place they could get. If it was in amongst the hills, so much the better. They always did that.
And they used to take care they wouldn't build a house on what they would call a fairy path.
Oh, not at all. Oh, no. They didn't build it. They built it as far as possible away from a fairy fort.
Well, how would they find out now whether they were on a pad or not?
Well, there was always a story going of seeing the lights moving at night along these paths, the fairy lights as they call them. They said there's an old fellow down in County Monaghan. He told us that after the trouble in this country, 1920 and 21 of those years, he never saw the fairy lights anymore. He used to see them coming from one fort away down near Errigal, and they come up on across up by Lochmore, the Lochmore Bog, and up to there. They used to be visiting each other, and then he'd see them going back down again later on in the night. But he said after the trouble he never saw them anymore.
That's a common idea in tradition, isn't it? That not all spaces are the same, not all times are the same. That's it.
Absolutely.
And maybe even for the benefit of anyone listening who isn't aware, but I mean, would you be able to explain even the idea of the fairy path in tradition, or what that means, or what?
In modern times, where we have a more secular, to put a word in it, society, where people look for a scientific kind of explanation more than anything else, be it for religion or for the fairies. You hear people nowadays talking about ley lines, whereas people long ago, I think, would call these things fairy paths. Now, a fairy path, I've always heard it is associated with just that, a path, because the fairies are just like us in practically every way. They have their roads, they're going somewhere too. And very often their paths are not by fairy bushes, lone bushes. And if you see a lone bush at one place, there'll be a lone bush at somewhere else. That's their markers, according to some people. Other people say no, a lone bush is where they collect to do their business. We'll say to collect after a game or before a game of hurling or whatever. There's various explanations for fairy bushes, but
this is the bush kind of standing alone in a field.
Oh yeah,
not planted by a human hand. Kind
of a lone white thorn bush, and nobody would seem to know where that particular bush comes from. Is it? Again, could it be dropped by a bird? Who knows where a bush like that comes from? If you want to look for rational explanations, you can say, haws are dropped by birds. The seed of a haw could be, who knows? But a fairy bush, you see, if you look at it from the other side, you don't dig up a fairy bush or disturb it and replant it, for the simple reason that, as I had one old man saying, a fairy bush belongs where it belongs, where it belongs. That's the way he put it. And there's no point in replanting it somewhere else, because that's where it belongs. And an old man told me recently that when a little child, one of those ones that were stillborn or unbaptized and would normally be buried in a Kylene, if that wasn't possible for whatever reason, and if there was a fairy bush nearby, that child would sometimes be buried under the fairy bush. And the reason? It was the most safe place to bury a little child, because it was like burying a child under a gravestone. Nobody would shift a fairy bush. It was an absolutely safe place to bury a child. And that's a very interesting point. The Christian and the fairy coming together like that, seamlessly.
Yeah.
And I met an old man whose little brother was buried under a fairy bush. And I remember watching him as he told me that. And a person doesn't tell you a thing like that if as a lie. You don't tell, I'm sure, a lie about your little brother who has died. God only knows how many years before. If you do, you're a very strange person. No, he was not lying. His brother was buried, he said, under a fairy bush, and he said, what safer place could he be buried than under a skach?
And the idea then to go to the sense of a house with an odd disturbance about it, that if you built your house across one of these paths, that you'd know all about it.
Well, that's the story I have in that about that, and that house is still standing. It's abandoned now, but I have a photo of it there.
And what happened in that house?
Oh, sure, there were all kinds of disturbances. The dresser used to come down at night, and tables and chairs dancing around the floor, and it continued. A mass was said in the house. No difference at all, until an old travelling man came the way and told them what they were after doing, and how to fix the problem. And he pointed out, look, he said, standing in the middle of the kitchen, he said, look down, fairy bush way down long, a lone white thorn, look out the back door, another white thorn down the field here, after building on their path. And of course they asked, what can we do? Because they were getting ready to move out. They were after moving out of an old kip of a house they had, it was ready to fall. This was a new house, new slated house, grand house. But he said, look what you did. And they come through here at night, he said, they're striking the wall there, at the back. He said, if you want any peace here, he says, look, he says, open up a door there and close that one. Once they're striking the wall here, he says, you'll have no peace in this house. And that very same day, your man that told me the story, he says, my father, that's what he did. He opened up a door there, and with the stones of that one, he closed this. And we went to bed that night. He said, we were there waiting for the noise to start as usual. No noise. Fixed it. Once they could pass in their path, where they'd been passing, he says, from the start of the world. No more noise.
Well, the fairies was supposed to be in every place that time, With all the old people, the fairy stories, they had it. A man would come in or a woman come in, you'd be there in the day or the night. A woman would come in and she'd tell you not to open that door, or don't throw out that water anymore in that place you're throwing it out. That'd be the broad daylight. These stories was going around too in the old times. They'd put the fear of the Lord in you with the fairy stories the old people had. If you were around that time and you could fill this house with stuff up of the old people, with the fairy stories. Whether they were true or not, of course they believed solid in them that they were true, that the fairies was in it. But I never seen nothing, fairies, but they said that the fairies were in it, in that time. I often heard now that in certain houses, if you wasn't gone out of the fireplace around the fire at a certain hour of the night, that you'd be cleared out of it. But this night they wasn't gone out of the place that was up late or something. And there was an empty chair in the front of the fire like that, and they started to go backwards and forwards. And no one sitting in it. No one, the people around couldn't see no one. Yet there must be something in some token to get out of the fireplace and go away, let you to bed or someplace. The chair started to move backwards and forwards, and no one sitting in it. And I hear the old people saying that.
And this kind of goes to the idea that we have in this country of the other world, and that it's kind of intermingled with our own. We coexist. They often bleed into each other, kind of with these.
Oh God,
it's not a kind of over there. You go to heaven. You can go to these places and come back. You can spend enormous amounts of time there in the blink of an eye, or no time can pass and it feels like hundreds of years for you.
No. I think that's only that with Christianity. I think that was a way to let people understand that you'll be in, we'll say, in purgatory for 1,000 years. You know, maybe when people couldn't read or write or whatever, to give people a notion that big time to make up for such sin. You know, very understandable. But I what's I going to say? I met an old man. Not met. I knew him. I have, I think, 160 or 170 hours of him there on MD. One of those people that you rarely meet. I think I've only met 3 or 4 of them in 44 years. But somebody you can't get the end of their stories. You go on and on and on until you meet them in hospital when they're dying. You just follow. You can't abandon people like this. You just have to. You become one of the family, except he had no family. He never got married, the same man, Mickey Griffey. But Mickey, he told me he met him. And I knew Mickey very well, and I had no reason to disbelieve him. And I remember asking him, Mickey, I said, what did I look like? And I remember being up in that old house of his, and God, the place was filthy. Filthy, I mean smoke and ashes and dirt, because the place hadn't been cleaned, I'd say, for 30 years, you know, an old bachelor house now, a big open fireplace. And I remember him pausing, an old fag, John Player, and he lived to be 99, a week short of 100. He only died there last October. And he says, the person beside you could be one of them, and you wouldn't know it. And it's an answer. When you think of it, it's a frightening answer. The person beside you could be one of them, and you wouldn't know it. All this nonsense about the little people and the pointy ears and all that old stuff. And just like us. Or they can take an animal shape, of course, but they can take any shape they like. But if you don't interfere with them, they won't interfere with you. But by God, if you do, it could cost you your life. But people nowadays, you see, with the fading away of tradition. Up the road there, I'm wrong, 2.5 miles up the road. Just there, we're very near the Galway border here. But when they were building the motorway, when you came up there, the motorway, the M18, they clipped the fort. They chopped a third of it. Now, since they did that, there have been, at least 30 accidents on that section of the road. Practically none between here and Ennis. We're halfway between Ennis and Gort here. 8 miles to Ennis, 8 miles to Gort. Crusheen is in the middle. There have been at least 20, if not more, accidents. It's almost a regular thing. One or other of those carriageways up there is blocked by an accident. Practically none on that section, all the same road. Now, I've had some of the old people saying, what could I expect? Look what I did to the fort. And now, I've said it to the engineers, here, and the stupid answer, but there's a mini climate up there. I mean, come on, for fuck's sake. How stupid can engineers be? Now, if I was to say to them, look what you did to the fort, it is the fairies, they'd fucking laugh at me. You can laugh at them too for their stupidity, but if you were to do that to a fort, you'd be up in court. They can do that to a fort and just bulldoze through a thing, no bother at all. But could it perhaps have something to do with it? I don't know. All I'm saying is there have been an amazing amount of accidents on that stretch of road, time after time after time. But they bulldoze the fort, and it's right there. You can see it there to the verge on the left as you go up towards Gort. So, who knows? Who knows?
Did you ever hear much about the fairies around your place? Was there any traditions about them?
Yes, there was about the forts, that you should never cut a bush in a fort. And an old cousin of mine, an old bachelor, they had a fort on their farm.
Yeah.
in a place called Lisbryan. You could understand there were plenty of lisses around there. And this fort, he insisted on cutting down some bushes out of it. And his sister alleged that it was a curse. A thorn got in his eye and he lost the sight of the eye.
And that's not your first time, I mean, talking with and dealing with engineers and those sorts of buildings. I mean, there was an internationally famous case in
below Platoon in the bush.
In 1999, wasn't
it? That's right.
What happened there at the lone bush?
Well, the bush was, I knew it from some of the local old people there and another old man there was another one of those men that I have so many hours of, and he was outstanding man. He knew his history, he knew his background there. He must have been a great listener, because he was a pleasure to listen to, and I used to call to him regular when I'd be coming home from school. I was teaching in Limerick at the time, and some of his stories are in there. Any of the stories marked Drumline, they're his. Mick O'Dwyer was his name, but he and others, Flann Liddy, some of the other people around there, they told me about the bush. But I was coming home one evening and I saw the diggers and machinery there, and so I stopped. And I just said to one of the workmen, lads with the helmets, what's happening here? I thought it was a housing estate or something, but it'd be a queer place for a housing estate. So I said, what? Well, they said, this is the way the new motorway is coming. I said, what's going to happen to the bush? Now, the bush at that time was up on a big height of rock, standing out, you couldn't miss it. Now, it was down but millions and millions of tons of earth, you see, were moved there when the road was being built, as you'd expect from a motorway. But sure, he knew nothing about the bush. He was only a worker there. So I phoned Clare FM, and fair enough, they gave me my say. And I wrote a letter to the Clare Champion, and I printed it. But then I wrote to the Irish Times. And your man from the correspondent from the New York Times, I remember Jim Clarity was his name, he saw it. And whether he just thought it was a Paddy Leprechaun story, I don't know, but he published a quarter-of-a-page feature in the New York Times about it, with myself and the bush in the background. But it was syndicated about, I think, in 20 papers across America. And then the fun started, because the BBC came, and French television and Belgian television, and Scandinavian, about 10 different crowds came. But of course then the NRA, they couldn't very well shift the bush because they looked very stupid indeed after all the publicity. So what they did was, what they should have done in the first place, of course, was, except that they didn't probably know genuinely. They just went back a couple of kilometres and varied the road slightly around the bush, and in any case it's there, and some little shithead then had to come along with a chainsaw and cut every branch off of it for no good reason. Every single branch down to the stump almost.
When was that?
Huh?
When was that?
About the motorway was in action about a year after the motorway opened. Some bollocks. Why? What kind of spiteful thing to do? But a couple of those old men said, where is he now? Where is he? As if to say, you don't get away with a thing like that. But it came back in full bloom. It's back again, like he was only pruning it, the fucker. Well, I wonder, did he prune himself as well? Because you don't do those kind of things and get away with it.
See, we have, Tom, in our house, my father had a great big tree, and it's an awful big tree. And it's an apple tree. And of course, it interfered with my father. Of course, I suppose they have it took out of the field where it is now, because the corn field it was in. My father always ploughed and everything around, and people used to say, "You're a foolish old man. What do you think you are? Why don't you throw that tree down and have all that space?" No, says my father. That tree is there in our old generation, and that's a real old tree, he said. And that's a fairy tree, he says, and I would not touch it. My father wouldn't touch the tree. No, he wouldn't let you go near an apple on it.
Really?
The poor old...
It was an apple?
Oh, I wouldn't dare an apple off it for anything. Oh, no, my father wouldn't have anyone touch an apple off it.
Now, it's
They
any other
packed out
trees?
with apples to be, and still we wouldn't touch them. The cows, like, cows, we let them into the field. They would eat the apple stuff, but we wouldn't touch them, no. Touch nothing belonging to a fairy, you're not supposed to.
And there's a certain ignorance, I suppose, in some of these, like you're saying, the workers who wouldn't know necessarily about these places if they're not from the area.
But when people were confined to horse and car travel, well, how far were you inclined to travel? Not far, but what you heard, it stuck because it wasn't wide, but it was deep.
Yeah. And
from being repeated and repeated, stories being told again and again, those are the kind of stories that you remember. Be old-fashioned.
And what do you think then for, say, the future of tradition in a sense? I mean, because on the one hand you have the thirst and the appetite for this material, and there is real nourishment in it as opposed to just that which endlessly generates appetite and noise that we see in modernity so often. But on the one hand, it's so easy now, technology, to spread more knowledge about traditional customs, or to teach even the younger generation or children that they'd be proud of these things and know about them. But
well, I would never compromise on the real thing, ever, no matter even for children. And if the stories have to be bloody, good. And if the stories are about Banshee, it's about the Banshee. I was above recently in Dublin, and I was listening to stories, and come on, it's Banshees and mini Banshees and Banshee children teaching, the Banshee family. And I said to myself, that's not right. To be teaching children about that kind of drivel about the Banshee. I said, no way. And there'd be books out now about that. Mrs. Banshee and that kind, Mr. Banshee kind of. Come on, that.
It's funny, it reminds me a bit of what, the likes of Sean Sudo and the Largy when they started the Folklore Commission or the Folklore Orient Society, and Hyde as well, even when they were thinking about, there was the quote, the rubbish that passes for folklore from the very late 19th century, florid, overblown literary kind of stuff that made them kind of, I suppose, they began this mechanical shift where they decided, exactly as you were saying, they wanted to document the real thing, like you've been doing in your own fieldwork, and then to, the way lullabies are often murderous and dark, but not to sanitize the wildness or the creativity of this. And there's, again, I suppose it just points to the slightly feverish and yet kind of tepid room temperature existence, I suppose, that can pervade different aspects of modernity, where you try and clean everything away and make it all a bit safe.
Yeah, that's what happened. Well, you know as well as I do, these fairy tales that we have, Cinderella and all those, what happened to them in the Victorian age, what they were like in reality. But to be an awful shame if the same thing happened to these. I wouldn't have it anyway. But no, I know what you're talking about when you say about stories being bowdlerised and reduced to nicey versions. Anytime I go into schools, I'd always ask the teacher, is there any person in the class who has been recently bereaved, or is there any person in the class who is sick or has a deformity or anything else? And then I'll ask the kids, what kind of stories do you want? And always the answer's the same, bloody murder, horror stories. And then I say to them, are you sure? Because, the horror that's on television, you know better than I do that it's only nonsense, that's only computerised kind of stuff. And they do know. They're not stupid, these kids, even primary school kids. I say, if you want horror stories, I give you horror stories. There's plenty of those in Irish folklore. I wouldn't use the word folklore because they might not, but they might. There's plenty of those in Irish stories. And it's kind of a thing that would make people think. Interesting kind of stories, no doubt about it.
Well, I just want to, I suppose, thank you so much for your time and for all the stories that you tell and spread around, and all the field work and recordings that you do are just incredible to keep such a document of local memory that's of national importance, international importance. I think you can be described as a national treasure. I think you can hopefully be an international one now if people listen to this around different parts of the world or whatever. But just want to thank you so much for your time and for telling the old stories, and I suppose knowing and honouring the people who told them as well. So.
Well, I give you no tea. God bless it, I'm sorry that. You have a cup of tea?
Huh?
You have a cup of tea?
Of course, yeah, if you've done, yeah.
Come on, tea.
Thanks a million, Eddie. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Not at all.
Thanks, I really appreciate it.
I bring it out here.
Yeah,
because she's getting the dinner, I think.
Sounds, yeah, no problem.
Leaving the village of Crusheen, and with night overtaking me on the road back to Dublin, I'm left with a great sense of the importance of our traditional stories. These are not the flotsam and jetsam of a misguided past, or the product of childish superstition forged in the half-light of ignorance. Our traditional narratives orient us, they guide us, they console us, and they let our imagination take flight. They connect us to the land and to our collective past, and as such can serve to guide and inspire us in the future. At the heart of it all, as Eddie himself has written, these stories are about respect. Respect for the land, for local knowledge, for the past, for the elderly, for those who have gone before us, and for those generations who will come after us. Ultimately, to have respect for these traditional narratives is to have respect for ourselves and for our culture, which Eddie has done so much work in his time to safeguard. In a world in which the echoes of the past are often drowned out by so much noise, we would do well to take the time for silence, to sit and listen to the voice of tradition as it speaks to us over and over again.